I've done this with a couple of different genealogy groups, but I also thought we would do it just ourselves for everyone. And just a little bit of background. My name is Peter McCracken. I'm a co-founder of ShipIndex. I have a master's degree in library science from the University of North Carolina and a master's degree in maritime history from East Carolina University. And ShipIndex is something that combines both of those areas of interest, of my areas of interest. And I know that a lot of folks who may be here are interested in genealogy and how they can use vessel research in genealogy. Not everyone, certainly. I'm excited to see Jim Shuttleworth, who is quite a historian in his own right. I'm really pleased to actually see you in person there briefly, Jim. So that's really super. We've emailed, but never gotten disconnected before. So that's super. Thanks a bunch. And everybody should feel free to turn your cameras off or leave your cameras on, whatever works best for you. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And I want to say that, as I mentioned a little bit, I'm really interested in maritime history. I love the way that maritime history has impacted American history and world history, and of course also the history of individuals as well through genealogy. So as I said, there's a lot that I just want to make sure you can see the ShipIndex page. Okay, I don't see the box around it, so that threw me off for a little bit. So there's a lot that you can do with maritime history and the history of vessels in genealogy. And I want to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to talk about just maritime history in general and how it might be useful. And then the main focus is some ideas for how to do research on vessels. I'm going to put a note in the chat, which is a URL for a blog post. It's basically a blog post, but it's like a schedule of the things that we'll be discussing today. And it's something that you can go back to. I don't have a handout, but I do have this. And so this gives you a little bit of an overview. And my intention is that when there are issues that come up or topics that come up that would benefit from more clarification and things that we discuss, I will update that blog post to talk about those things that we talked about. The ways that maritime history can be useful in genealogy are I think quite remarkable. Now, of course, some people would like to just add leaves to the tree. I think that's a really great expression. Maybe you're writing your family history and you'd like to add a picture of the cruise ship that your grandparents took a cruise on for their honeymoon. And that would be a nice little bit that you want to add. But there are lots of other things where you can really learn about your family, even if your own ancestors aren't mentioned at all. For example, if you know that an ancestor served on a particular vessel in a navy from one date to another date, then you can search for a history of that particular vessel. And when you learn what happened to that vessel, you are then also learning what happened to your ancestor. And I think that's really valuable, especially if it's someone who maybe didn't talk very much about their experiences during wartime, for example, before they passed, perhaps. It is possible to find a logbook, not a logbook, but a journal, say something that a record that someone kept of the vessel of the voyage that one of your ancestors emigrated on. More and more of these records are digitized, or they have been cataloged and are recorded in directories online. And so if you found one of these that you knew was for the voyage that your ancestor sailed on, maybe it doesn't mention your ancestor, but maybe it does. That would be pretty crazy too. But it could still give you an idea of what that experience was like, whether it is a logbook recorded by the vessel or a journal kept privately by a passenger on board, or maybe by a crew member or something like that. So there are a lot of different ways that I think that vessel research can impact how you do genealogy. But there are also other ways, the things that you can find that matter, and in maritime history. And a couple of those I'd like to point out. So I know we have a couple of people from Washington State. I was born and raised in Seattle. I live in upstate New York now, but I consider Seattle my home. And some of you may recognize this fantastic picture. This is one of my favorite shots of all time of the Monongahela, the last tall ship being towed out of Lake Union as the Aurora Bridge is being completed. And this is something that we can find. It's if you didn't know that it existed, and you didn't know that it existed in the collection of the Puget Sound Maritime Historical Society, or you didn't know that PSMHS existed, you'd have a really hard time finding it. And one of the things that ShipIndex can do is to help you find those types of things that you wouldn't otherwise find. This is another little bit of Northwest history of this is for when I'm thinking about regional history, this is the Equator, a decaying, perhaps now decayed ship in the port of Everett, which is being recorded, and the Wawona, like the Wawona, the vessel won't survive, but records of it will. And then some folks may have seen this story from yesterday about the Huronton, which is a ship that sank 80 years ago in the Great Lakes. So there's all kinds of things. These things are still being discovered and they're being explored. And when you're looking for information about these vessels, it's tough to know where to go. And I believe that ShipIndex is actually a great place to do that in many different instances. So let's take a look at ShipIndex. I'm not only going to talk about ShipIndex, but ShipIndex is a great place to start for doing a lot of research on ships. A little bit of background of the database. It tells you what books, magazines, websites, databases, whatever, mention the vessels that you would like to know more about. Heather, can you take a look at the chat right now? I think there's some.
Yeah, I was just writing back. I see.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just writing back.
Okay. There are over 1,100 different resources. Those mean books or runs of magazines or websites or other databases that are listed in the database, with over 3.3 million different citations in that database. There's a free version of the database, which has over 150,000 citations from 74 resources. That part is what I created when I was doing this just as a sort of side project, working as a reference librarian at the University of Washington in Seattle. Since turning this into a full-fledged company, everything else, plus essentially everything else, has gone into the subscription database. The cost for the subscription database is $6 for 2 weeks of access, up to $65 for a year of access. And you may find that a library near you also has access as well, or a maritime museum can provide access for you. If they subscribe, you can use it there. So I'm going to provide some examples, do some searching here to show you what you can do with the database. Now, I am logged in right now, but there's a fair bit that you can find when you're not logged in also. So I'll take a search for Stafford, say, and now I'm finding information about a couple of different vessels, and then I'm gonna dive in a little bit further to that. First, I see this one.
Excuse me, Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
A few of us are unable to see your attachments that you're opening.
Hey, everybody, there's a lot of people in the room, so I'm trying to answer in the chat just to keep us on track. But if you hover over the top of the screen, there's a little tab that appears that says View Options. And at that point, you should be able to see Peter's screen. There should be an option to see, and it's right in the top center to the size of the screen, full screen, everything like that. And also, just one thing I also want to say is, if you are having difficulty seeing it, we will be sending out a recording too. So there's that. But
So what I'm looking at right now is you can actually in some ways follow along in your own web page too, if you go to ShipIndex.org and do a search for Stafford. Now, if you're not currently a subscriber, you won't see all of the resources that I see, but you'll be able to see some of them. So what I have here, what we've done is we've taken all of these different indexes to these books and these magazines and things. We put them into this one big database. So I found 129 citations from 51 different resources for ships named Stafford. sometimes I don't really know much else about them. Although I can look at this and see that this is a history of the United States naval operations in World War II. So I have a good sense that's probably not an emigrant ship, for example. And this one's from the Complete Book of Emigrants, so that's probably not a naval vessel. And as we go further down, we find, I'll just scroll quickly down, you'll find a little bit more information about each of these. This is the information that came from the citation that we have scanned and then put into the database. So here's Stafford, this American whale ship that's in the returns of whaling vessels sailing from American ports, and a variety of other things. And I will come back to this Stafford here in WorldCat in a little bit. But I want to highlight this Stafford here, which is like a special Stafford, because this is one where we know exactly which hull, exactly which vessel we are talking about. And I've been able to bring in this picture of this vessel from Wikipedia or Wikidata, basically. And so these are specifically the Stafford that was known as DE-411 and is described in a couple of different resources. Now, one thing that I want to highlight is this exact match bit here. It says, see other matching ships. I'm not quite sure what we'll find in this case, so we'll take a look. But if you're searching for a ship that has a couple of words in it and you look for just one of them, say you're looking for City of Stafford and you just typed in Stafford, which is a reasonable approach to take, it's important to know that there are all these other bits, all these other citations that exist in here as well. Now, you may be looking at these and saying, Belladonna, that doesn't say Stafford anywhere in it. But if I click on it somewhere in here, I'm just using the search tool in my browser, I find there's an entry for a ship from Stafford, Virginia. And that's why it appeared here. There's some advanced searching that you can do in the database. It's funny. The ways of doing it are a little bit weird, but if you do @ship name and then Stafford, you will get all of the ships that have the word Stafford somewhere in the name of the vessel. And there's even more that you can do here. If you said, oh, I only want to see the ones that end with Stafford, you can do that as well. And the reason that you might want to do this is because, let's see, you might be doing, I'm trying to think what you did, falls of. Okay, so there's not as many as I expected there, but we find a fair number of them. And that's one way that you can do some searching, do some sort of customized searching in here. And when you click on the help button, you will find all of the directions for doing all of these different ways of searching in the database. I want to go back to where I started when I was looking at Stafford, because I want to highlight, again, sometimes you'll find a link like this one, Dictionary of American Naval Fighting Ships. This will take you directly to that resource, and it will give you a history of that particular resource, that particular ship. If we have a link, that will take you there whenever we can. Some of these will have links to the pages. Now, I don't know if this one's going to work for me or not. I'm taking a little bit of a risk here because I think there have been some changes in how HathiTrust is working. So it's not quite pulling up the pages. We're trying to get that figured out, and we'll get that fixed soon. But I know that there was an entry for, so we had seen that Stafford that was a whaling vessel. These are this is what I love about this resource. There's so many different things that exist out there, and it's hard to know what you might find if you don't learn about them. The city of New Bedford, which was a huge whaling port, has digitized all of these records about whaling voyages out of New Bedford. And so this is for the vessel Stafford that sailed out in 1854, returned in 1857. And here's the information of the names of the individuals who are on there. And over here, this is their lay. So they told Lyman Fowler, you're going to get 150th of this, of what you earn. And 150 is a pretty big number, right? And Lyman, perhaps not having had a full education, thought that 150 is a big number, not thinking that they're going to give him 1/150th of the profits of that particular voyage. And actually, he was probably going to lose all of it when he was buying stuff that he needed from the slop chest on board. So was pretty tough being a whaler in the 1850s. You can see the Seth Barker, the mate there, he had a 1/18th lay, so he was going to do a whole lot better than our buddy Lyman there. This is an entry in WorldCat, and WorldCat is, and these, the WorldCat links are actually in the free database. And one of the neat things that you can find here is all kinds of books that are either by or about the vessel in question. So we clicked on the Stafford, and here is a sketch of the old New Bedford whaling bark Stafford and the whaling industry. Here's the Emerald Bark whaling logbook, and WorldCat has made some changes. My guess is that probably in this, the Stafford is mentioned because it was spoken. That's not meaning that they met in the middle of the ocean. Somewhere is the word Stafford here. It doesn't quite have the specificity that it used to, but it can still be quite useful. And what you can do here is you can see, oh, this logbook is in the Phillips Library at Peabody Essex Museum. So that's pretty neat. So I've talked about a couple of the ways of searching for stuff within the ShipIndex database itself, but I'd like to highlight something very quickly with, if I'm just going to go to Google, everybody's favorite search engine, and I want to highlight some things that you can do to be more effective when you're searching for vessels just out in the wide web. If you were to type constellation, you're going to find all kinds of different things, and a lot of them are certainly not the vessel that you're looking for. But if you use the phrase around and then put a number in there, which represents the number of words that you'd like it to be near something, you can then do around and sloop of war, say. And then you're going to bring up specifically the constellation that is in Baltimore Harbor now. And you've significantly narrowed down the results that you're finding. And I expect that if we take out around here, we'll still get some of these, but they're not going to be quite as specific. They're pretty good. But if you're looking for a ship named Cleveland and what kind of vessel it is, those are some ways that you can narrow it down and get better results when you're looking in Google, for example. So another idea, a couple of other things I just want to, in the in the list I put together, I highlighted a couple of these instructions and the different ways of typing this in, and also wanted to mention that there are many ship registers that exist. Registers, directories, and things like that. Some of them have been digitized, but many have not. And finding directories of registers is a bit tough. It's something that I'd like to work on and make more visible. Like the early Lloyd's registers are available online, but they have been digitized, but they haven't been put into a spreadsheet so that you can really search them. And some of the digitization projects, particularly these ones from the 1930s, didn't turn out quite well. But if you go back to these earlier ones, you can go back and find the original registers. So if you're looking for a vessel, especially an English one from the 1780s, for example, you can look in these to learn a little bit about them. But this is a good mention of the variation of resources that you can find. Sometimes they're going to be just one entry about the vessel with very little information about it, like these annual publications from Lloyd's Register. Here's the Aldbrough, information about maybe who was the captain at the time, the size of the vessel in tonnage, and this was probably where the Philadelphia here is either where it was built or where it's registered, or something where it was last coppered or something like that. And there's other information here as well that can give you, it's just a tiny bit of information. It's very different from that directory dictionary of American naval fighting ships, for example, which gives you a history of that particular vessel. And then there are other things like the ones we saw from New Bedford, which are about a specific voyage. So things vary greatly in what you'll find when looking in the collection. when you're looking in different resources. If you are looking in WorldCat and you find something that's interesting, I'm going to try to find a random book. All of these are directories which have been digitized by Mystic Seaport, and so you can find a lot of information here. Let's see. Laura asked, where do you go to find the key of what information is in each column? You'll find it in the very first pages, I believe, for these. Actually, no. I guess you just have to know. There may be some discussion earlier on. This is from the 1780s, though. It looks like the early part of this was not preserved. This is a reprinted edition. I'm not quite sure. It's a good question. I think it's going to vary by resource, and I'm not seeing much in this one. I'd have to look closer to figure out what's going there. I'll use this as an example. Okay, Stafford Bark, inventory of the Mallory family papers. That's interesting to see. So apparently, we did see that Peabody Essex Museum has a logbook from the Stafford, and it looks like Mystic Seaport may also as well. They did in 1964. It's unlikely that they've gotten rid of it, but it might be something that looks interesting. So if you find something that looks interesting, you can click on the Find in a Library link to see who has that particular resource. And it will go into WorldCat, which is something I described a little bit earlier. I mentioned earlier, but I didn't describe. WorldCat is a directory of not all, but many of it is a compilation of the holdings of many libraries in the US and around the world. It can be incredibly useful at times. There have been some changes there over the last couple of years that have made it a bit harder to use in some ways. And sometimes you don't find all of the versions of a particular book that you're looking for. In this case, we found here's inventory of the Mallory papers. It believes that I am based in Ithaca, New York, which is actually true. And it sees that, Cornell University has got a copy of this, and they're not very far away. Onondaga County Public Library also has a copy, and these other libraries have got copies as well. So if you put your zip code into here, it will tell you what resources are in there. Christina asked, how about JSTOR? Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to point out the question.
Yeah, Christina asks, how about JSTOR? Is that equal to WorldCat? It is not. It is different. JSTOR is a collection of old magazines or journals, primarily scholarly journals, and they have taken many hundreds of these journals, digitized them, and made them available. And the early runs are generally available to pretty much anybody. So they're incredibly valuable, but they're different in the sense that they took all of these journals and they put them all available online. What WorldCat is doing is saying, I know that these libraries own this particular title, and I'm just going to tell you that they own it. I'm not giving you digital access to that particular resource. They have this terrible borrow link here. Like you could borrow something from a library that you have absolutely no connection with. You could probably still go see it, but you can't necessarily borrow it. Maybe you could get it through interlibrary borrowing, but that again is a bit of a challenge. It's a misnomer, and I don't like the changes that they have made here. But so that's a little bit of a difference between JSTOR and WorldCat. I've tried to do some neat things to find all of the ships that are mentioned in all of the different issues of JSTOR, which is a real project and not one that was successful, I'm afraid. But JSTOR is an incredible resource and really valuable, especially if you have a bit of time and have an unusual name or of a person or a ship. You could try searching there and just seeing what comes back. So I'm going to jump back here. I think we've covered a couple of the things that I wanted to highlight here. Let's see, Rebecca, if you select view all formats, in addition to sometimes be able to find a PDF version of the book or document you're looking for. That could be true if it's in Google Books or HathiTrust, but those are only going to be books that were published before 1924 or something like that, when they're either those books or books that are completely out of copyright because, say, they were published by the US government. The US government doesn't put copyright on its books, so those are freely available to share. The same with the others that you find in Google Books. And So that one that I clicked on to try to take me to HathiTrust, there's just been a change. The full text of that particular book is in HathiTrust, but my attempt to link to the specific page didn't quite work out. Let's see. So I'd like to talk about some other ways of doing searching for vessels. And I mentioned a bit, very briefly, I mentioned about searching in Google and then using WorldCat. And then I wanted to talk about searching for historical newspapers. And historical newspapers, I think, are an incredibly valuable tool in lots of the work that we want to do in looking for information about vessels. And there's this neat list in Wikipedia of archives of online newspapers. And it can be incredibly valuable if you know where you want to search and which newspapers you want to search. Now, often there's just an index. There's not full text. It looks like some things are marked with a dead link, but it's nice that they have at least marked that. What I would like to do is show you how you can use, there are many free resources here, but there are also a lot of resources that cost a bit more, but you can add from in a university library near you. And what I want to say is that most, not all, most university libraries, especially the state ones, welcome your coming in and using their resources. During the day, I work at a very large university library, and I work on the licenses that we sign with the companies that we are buying this content from. And at my institution, it's very important that we allow walk-ins to use these resources. A walk-in is a person who just walks in off the street. Now, the university where I work, if you haven't figured it out yet, since I'm live in Ithaca, New York, is, you might think that Cornell is a private university, but it's actually both. It's both a private university and a public university. It's the land-grant university for the state of New York, and we take our outreach goal, our intention to offer outreach to the community at large, we take that very seriously. And you will find that it will vary from institution to institution. But if you have a large university near you, there's no reason not to call them up and say, hey, I have no connection with the university at all, but I'd like to come in. Can I come in and just use the resources that you offer? And hopefully they'll say yes. Now I'm going to go into one of the databases that we have, ProQuest Historical Newspapers. Is a large collection, and I encourage you, small colleges are great as well. They may be great places to go. It's just the fact of life that a bigger university is going to have more resources than a small college will. Although you can also, if you've got a state library near you. Now, interestingly, some state libraries see serving the public as a core part of their goal, and some of them actually don't. They just serve the state, the entity of the state, not the public. So you have to see what they say, but those are opportunities as well where you might be able to get into something and use those resources. I didn't have to log in here because I had logged in earlier today. Normally, because I'm off campus, I'd have to log in. But when you go into the library, you can access all of these different resources, and you should be able to access them without needing to log in. Or if you do, you can ask for assistance at the reference desk, and they will most likely assist you. I'm going to try doing a search for Monongahela oiler, and I'm going to see what I can find. And I found 490 different results. These are just from historical newspapers in this one particular collection. And I'm going to show you another way of searching, and a way of searching these when you actually don't have access to these resources as well in just a minute. But so I find this one, 9 U.S. sailors hurt as fire erupts in a ship boiler room. So this is certainly not the Monongahela we saw at the beginning, not the tall ship that was being towed out of Lake Union. But this was something that happened in 1989, where an oiler served the USS America carrier group caught on fire, broke out in the boiler room, something. So that could be something that can be quite interesting and might be relevant to the research that you're doing. I'm going to try something else here because someone had mentioned JSTOR. I'm going to go to JSTOR and see what we find for Monongahela. Now, one thing that I know that we'll find, so I'm looking at JSTOR now. I'm looking at the full collection of JSTOR. And if you're looking at going from home and just going to jstore.org, you'll be able to access some stuff, but not everything. And Monongahela is a very broad, JSTOR is a very broad collection, all kinds of subjects. So we're going to find lots of stuff about the Monongahela River and all kinds of different things that we find in here. But some of them are recent. This is just a poem. And then some of them are much more, I'll see what I could do if I do USS Monongahela. I just don't know what I'm going to, most impressive sight, the burning of USS Monongahela on St. Patrick's Day, 1908. Just have to wait a moment for this to appear. This is from the magazine Military Images, volume 13 from 1992. So this is also a different Monongahela than the one I showed at the very beginning. This one's not nearly as large, really, but that could be really interesting if that's something that's the vessel that you're looking for. So I'm going to jump back now, and I'm going to show you another, let's see, here's ProQuest. So I'm going to go back to the library homepage, and I want to take a step back and tell you about another tool that is super interesting. This is fairly advanced, but bear with me, and I hope this will be useful. And then I'll wrap up, and then I'll be open to have some time for questions, for discussion, and maybe clarification if that's needed. So the way that Google works is that it goes out into the world and it indexes every website that it chooses to index or that it finds. It reviews it, it pulls all that information, and it puts it into its massive database. That when you type in those words, it looks at its own database and says, okay, I found these different sites. Now I'm going to show you what I found, and I'm going to create a link to go to that place. But it did not go out into the world and scrape all the websites that exist in the world. One of the things that it doesn't scrape are these full text database, these databases that libraries subscribe to. They don't allow anyone to access them because the companies that build them charge money for them and costs a lot to put them together, and they don't use advertising as a way of making money the way that Google does. So in the early 2000s, libraries were trying to figure out how to compete with Google in this way because it's so easy to do a Google search, and you had to go to all these different databases to do your searches in libraries. And after some fits and starts, the product that they came up with was what's called a discovery layer. It has also gone out and it has indexed all of the content from these databases, but the companies that build discovery layers had to work with each company to get access and some agreements money-wise to be allowed to index all of that content and put it together. So there are two major discovery layers that exist right now. Excuse me. That's not true. There are three, but two of them come from the same company. So I'm going to go to what we call articles in full text. This is the discovery layer that we use at Cornell. So I can type in USS Monongahela here, and I'm going to see what comes back. And what it's doing is it found 834 entries from a bunch of different databases. And this was an article in All Hands from a military and government collection from Company A. Here's a book, an ebook that mentions Monongahela somewhere in there. Here's a newspaper article from the Uniontown Herald Standard. It's another thing from that same one. So all kinds of different entries that you find from all of these resources. And then you can access this if you're on campus. And then when you're on campus, you can also just get access to that particular resource as well. So it should be loading that. Here's the book that they were looking to get, and somewhere in here is the phrase Monongahela. So that's really neat to do, but you have to be like, I'm going to try another one just to show you a little bit more about what it's like. This is another ebook. There's a lot of ebooks that are coming back. Logbook of Francis Cunningham Lowry aboard the Monongahela sloop, 1902 to 1905. And this is from Archive Grid. This is a little bit different, but it's interesting to find. This is actually a logbook that is held in a library somewhere. I didn't know about this. I don't know what we're finding. It should still go through. Okay, here we go. And it actually took us back. It took us to a different version of WorldCat. It doesn't tell us what library is in here. And this is, I have a blog post about how to solve this problem. This is a tricky little problem. What it was doing was looking in NUCMUC, National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections. So just very briefly, you could look in NUCMUC to find out who owned this, if this really mattered to you. And if that doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. I will add a little mention about NUCMUC onto the page, and I'll add a link to the blog entry I wrote about how to find stuff, that where it says that it exists in a library, but they're not going to tell you which library it is. Kind of annoying. As I said, there are two main companies that sell discovery layers. There are two big companies that provide a lot of services in the library industry, and they sell databases as well. And one of them, ProQuest, the one that I used before, has the most newspapers in it. And the other company is called EBSCO. ProQuest won't let EBSCO reproduce any of the ProQuest content, and EBSCO won't let ProQuest reproduce any of the EBSCO content in the opposite discovery layer. So what that means is that if you want to search newspapers without having access to them, because let's step back a little bit, you can still search these discovery layers in many cases, even if you can't get to the actual content. So if you want to search discovery layers and you want to include newspapers in them, then you want to find a library that has that discovery layer from ProQuest. So there are ways of searching this out. Let's just say that Yale has, I've got instructions here, but why does it matter? If I tell you that Yale is one of those libraries, then that's enough, right? We know that they're one of the biggest libraries in the country. You just go to the Yale Library homepage and you find this quick search here. I have no connection with Yale. I don't have any access. I don't have any way of logging in to any of their resources. But I'm going to try typing Monongahela near Euler. I'm going to see what we find. So any of you can do this as well, even if you have no connection with Yale at all, and it's searching several hundred different databases in the background. Now, you cannot, in many instances, you cannot access that particular resource, but you can know that it exists, and that's 2/3 of the way to getting to it. Bridge across Monongahela River near Reevesville. So this is a Senate document, so we probably could get directly to it, because you shouldn't need to log into anything since it's freely available. So I'll look at something different, something from Exciting Cities. Probably it's talking about, is it Monongahela, Pennsylvania, or New Jersey, perhaps? And it says full text available, but I can't get to that because I don't have a way of logging in. But I know that it exists. So if I found that, if that sounded particularly interesting to me, I could then track down, say, okay, now I want to go track down Redbook, and I want to find out where I can find that particular article. And you can get in and actually do even more searching in here as well. I sometimes am astounded that you can get in and do so much of this searching without subscribing or having any connection with the institutions. And I believe that this is a super special, moderate, fairly advanced approach to a way of doing some searching, but it could be quite valuable in a lot of instances, regardless of your subject. Here's an article from Newsweek about that fire that we saw in the fleet oiler Monongahela. So all kinds of different things that we can find here. Again, this is at Yale. I've got no connection with Yale. You can do this searching just as well as I can when you start with at the Yale Library homepage. Let's see, what else do I want to, I think, so then the next question is, another thing that I want to highlight is another resource, at university libraries and college libraries, and that is they're called LibGuides, and they're directories that are created for students and for researchers. They're put together by expert reference librarians as a great way of learning more about specific subjects. And so if I'm interested in regional history, I'm going to say Pennsylvania history. I'm just guessing here. I don't I'm just going to put the word LibGuide in there, and I find the top hit is a Pennsylvania history guide from the State Library of Pennsylvania. We find a LibGuide here from Widener Library that's compiling a Pennsylvania legislative history. So that's not what we're looking for. This is a local history research guide for Indiana County from IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I find these so filled with fantastic information. You don't know exactly what you're going to find, but I feel like you're always going to find something useful. These are people who know a lot of information. They're highlighting the various resources that you might be able to use. They mentioned using America History and Life. That's the standard database for searching in American history, for example. And here's something somewhat random and very specific: the Coal Culture Project, history of coal towns in the Indiana County area. I think that's I didn't know anything about that. That's really remarkable. So I'm going to wrap up now, and we can have a little bit of a discussion, and I'll try to address some questions. But I just want to, and I think some of the researching things that I'm talking about are very broad and useful in a lot of different senses. But I find maritime history to be such a fascinating topic about the transport of people and of ideas and of goods over huge chunks of land, not land specifically, obviously, huge amounts of space. And I think it's really fascinating. And I think it's an area that deserves a lot more exploration. And it is particularly useful when we're looking at genealogy, since just about everyone, except those folks who came up from Central or South America, or who came across on a land bridge, or else who came in the last 50 years, pretty much all of them came by boat. And so there's a lot that we can learn about a lot of those vessels. I hope that the information I've shared with you today has been a bit useful and give you some ideas about ways to search, and that you can go back to that blog post that I put together that highlighted most of the different things that I've talked about today. So thanks so much for your time, and I'll be glad to tackle a couple of questions if I can now.
Yeah, I'm going back up through the chat, and someone did ask, how do you learn to transcribe handwritten logs, etc.? Is there free or open source software for reading handwritten materials?
There is one company, I think I saw another company as well, basically two companies that have technologies that allow them to do optical character recognition, or OCR, of handwritten materials. This is like super complex, very difficult stuff to do. So there's no open source resources for that. Even the most standard basic OCR work is a real challenge. I spend some of my time fixing some of those for some print newspapers, and you can see how poorly it does there. So it's remarkable that they're able to get anything at all out of handwritten. So the answer really is, I don't think there's any way to, without just working on yourself, learning what someone's script is like. There are no online tools that I know of, and I don't think I would expect to find any that can do that for you. Sorry.
There's a couple comments here on Google newspaper. Google has newspaper scanned into its collection, and how to check that out. Thank you so much for doing that. And then,
but it is important to remember that the OCR on those is quite bad. It really demands people looking at it. And the California newspaper collection at UC Riverside, I think it is, allows anyone to dive in there and start correcting the stuff that's been collected there. And it makes all the difference in the world. Google's not going to do that by hand. The stuff of the Library of Congress, and actually what Google has is probably stuff that the Library of Congress actually digitized. And they digitized that 20 plus years ago. So the OCR was generations behind what it is today. So unfortunately, you need to take a close look too, because if the transcription or the OCR work wasn't accurate, then you're not going to find the terms that you're looking for. Even if you can see words, the computer couldn't, and that is going to provide a challenge over time.
There's a couple of things here that I think we're going to have to do with when we do the Stump Peter. We're starting to do little YouTube snippets where Peter answers specific
I like to call them
research.
Ask Peter.
All right.
Ask
Peter. Here's one that is a story. Family lore says that great-grandpa Emil Jensen, age 5, was above deck with brother Chris, age 3, when they emigrated from Denmark. A big wave came over the ship and Chris was almost washed overboard, except that Emil grabbed him, prevented him from going overboard, and saved his life. How could I corroborate that story? And then there's some names and some, I think I found them on the ship's manifest and the arriving and crew lists and things like that, but it's just a manifest. Is there any thoughts you could think? Could I at least find weather conditions as the ship crossed?
So I think this is a really good, a really great example to keep in mind. And it's something that I think about when I'm doing research. All that we really have is a written record, right? We need to find a written record somewhere. In this instance, who might have written down this incident? And it mostly, just about the only ones that I can come up with would be the logbook of that vessel for that voyage, or travel journals kept by anybody who was on board. And if you know the name of that ship, so let's just take a quick look there and see what we find. I would also say one of the nice things about this database is that it's the largest, I think it's the largest collection of vessel names anywhere. So you can, like, I've had experiences where I think it was someone came up to me at a genealogy conference in England and said, my ancestors sailed on the Suffolk Maid. And so I searched for Suffolk Maid and I didn't find it. But then when I searched, just did Suffolk, then I found Maid of Suffolk or something like that. So it's like an authority list for vessel names. It's certainly not perfect, but I think it's better than the other things that you're going to find out there. So if we know that this was, what information we know? 1894 arriving. You could also look in the newspapers for that day because they might record. And this is a project that I'm hoping to pursue. I would look at the New York Herald for the days after that arrival. And the New York Herald was the best resource for information about vessels coming into New York, better than the New York Times. They have the most information about vessels arriving in the city. And perhaps there might be a vignette there about that experience in the New York Herald. When I'm looking here at Venetia, most of these are naval vessels. Lloyd's war losses, history of the Royal Navy, British vessels lost at sea, wooden shipbuilding at Quebec, Ellis Island ship database. But even if this includes the mention that you're referring to there, there's probably not going to be any record of that there. South Atlantic Seaway, that's a possibility. An illustrated history of passenger lines and liners. Oh, no, from Europe to Brazil. Sorry, you have to read the whole thing. 1890. North Atlantic Seaway. We were looking at South Atlantic Seaway. This is a different book. North Atlantic Seaway. An illustrated history of the passenger services. Maybe there's a mention in there of that particular voyage. It's tough to know. Those are the ways that I would look, and I would look through all of these and I would copy and paste the ones that might be relevant. Clearly, some of these are not. And when you look at this, okay, obviously 1864 is, but we'll find something a little bit later. We'll just choose one of these. This is earlier than you want, but we can see that we can click on it and see what happens. And what it does is it takes us to Mystic, to this entry, and we can find, and it's not going to tell us much. Okay, so this one is out of Quebec, built in 1859. We don't know if that's the same vessel, but it could be. And so maybe that Charlie Mann book might actually be worth taking a look at. But this is how I think you'd have to research it. It would be I think it'd be tough to do, but it's possible. And I can also use this to address the question that Jim asked about using ShipIndex to search when you have a partial vessel name. So if you can, on the help page, you'll see that you can use an asterisk for wildcard searching. So I could do Venet star. That will return not only every ship name that has Venet in it, but also every citation that has Venet somewhere in that. So that's more than we want. That's not going to work. So I'm going to do at ship underscore name, and then do Venet star. And now I get back a different collection of names. So we got Veneto, Venetian maid, Veneteo, Veneto, Venetier, this Reggio Augusto Veneto, Great Venetian, Alexei Venezianov. So those are some ways of doing that. You can also do, oh, here's some stole searches. And then what I'm going to do, first I'm going to just do, oh, I should have done, we're looking for the ship name. So I'm going to do at ship name star STLE. We're going to find all the ships that have castle as in the name. And some of these, if we go forward, we'll probably we'll find Castle Howard and stuff like that. I'm only looking for ones that end with castle. So I can do that as well. I can do ship name, what do I do? Star STLE, and then I put the $sign at the end of it. I think that's right. Let's see what happens. So now we've come back. We've still got hundreds and hundreds of things where it has Athlone Castle, but also Apostle. And that fits. It's STLE in the ship name at the end of the ship name. So those are a couple of the different ways that you can do more advanced searching with the ship name. The most important part is to use that ship name portion, and then you can do some different things to it. And there's a couple of examples here. We can use parentheses to make more complicated searches as well. So this would be either Mary or Elizabeth and Queen. I'm going to do that again, but I'm going to do that ship name Mary type Elizabeth close ampersand Queen. And so now we have found vessels where the name of the ship has either the word Mary or the word Elizabeth and the word Queen. So that gets pretty specific. Let's see. Oh, I mentioned Transcribus for handwritten documents. I didn't know about that. Thank you for sharing that. I'll definitely have to explore that. I don't know about that. So I see a couple of other questions. They're talking about specific events, and I think it's very similar to the question about the young children on board, where you probably need to find some record of the event having happened and seeing it recorded somewhere. And so it's a similar sort of search. And I will say that one trick that you can use is to not be logged if you are particularly looking for logbooks or journals of a specific ship. That is the WorldCat record. So it's also books by or about the ship. Then it's best to not actually be logged in, because those subject headings are in the free database. And the subscription database is 20 times the size of the free database. This is the only time, in my opinion, where using the free database is preferable to the subscription database. But because they have such high value, and because when I worked with WorldCat to agree to add those, I said I'd put them in the free database. It's really better to search for them in the free database. I hope that makes sense. Are there any other questions that be good that folks would like to? You can feel free to unmute yourself as well if you would like.
And we are also right at the hour. Oh, here's one that just came in from Rebecca.
There's a question about whaling voyages. Person was born in 1838, takes a whaling ship around the tip of South America and then heading to Japan. What port in New York does the whaling ships usually left from New York in the 1850s? did the newspapers that time in New York talk about the ships. The most of the voyages would sail from New Bedford. New Bedford was the primary source for whaling voyages, especially in the 1850s. And you might find a few out of Boston and maybe some out of New York, but New Bedford is the place to look. And the New Bedford Whaling Museum and Mystic Seaport are two museums that focus particularly, but not solely, on whaling. And so both of those would be good places to look. That resource that I looked at, the New Bedford, I followed for Stafford, I went to the New Bedford Whaling Directory. They have actually digitized a lot of whaling content, so 3 different organizations, the New Bedford Whaling Museum, the City of New Bedford, and then Mystic Seaport and their collections. Those would be places where I would start looking. Even they're going to focus on whaling pretty broadly, not just out of Massachusetts. Of course, Mystic is in Connecticut, closer to New York, but that's where I think you'll find those would be really good places to start. Oh, this is an interesting question. And then maybe we'll wrap up after I tackle this question. Rebecca says, I'm keenly interested in the original ownership interests in ships my grandfather was associated with. He was a shipping and commission merchant, and he owned shares in over 100 ships between 1830 and 1899. Seems that the only source for these kinds of details are in the ship registers, which as you said, are difficult to obtain. I think there's more resources than the ship registers. I spent one summer working at the Maine Maritime Museum in the library. It was a wonderful museum, but it was not an exciting summer. And I just was basically refiling papers from the shipping merchants out of that area that are in those collections. And so there are a lot of, the approach that I would take would be to say, what are the names of the companies that he was associated with? Then I would look in WorldCat and in NUCMUC, the National Union Catalog of Manuscript Collections, to see if any libraries in the United States have recorded that they own the papers from those collections. And I think you'll find that there are quite a few museum libraries that do have those sorts of things. And it could be in state libraries or university libraries as well. The thing is, you're not going to find much by the ship name there. I think you need to go by the company name and see who's got those corporate records. I think that's the approach that I would recommend as a place to start.
I was at the Maine Maritime Museum 2 summers ago and spent a few days there. And I leafed through a number of ship register books. It was fascinating.
Yeah, but they just have one line for each vessel. And so it's just the one point in the year. It just doesn't, I don't think it may tell you who the owner is, but I think you already know that. That would be and then I would also look there are books about the different shipping lines. Those are the things I'd research too. And then one person asked about ships for the 17th century. Would the UK still have ownership records? Probably not. The UK, I don't know what coverage of dates of coverage they did this to, but they basically got rid of, they decided they would keep a representative 5% of all of their crew list collections and records about shipping at some point, I think in the 1960s or so. And the Memorial University of Newfoundland, I think it was, that's crazy, you can't do that. And they were still going to do it, but Memorial University rescued a lot of those papers. I don't know if they go as far back as the 17th century, but Memorial University, I've never had the chance to visit there, but they have surprisingly a lot of UK shipping records, somewhat surprisingly. I think that's all the time we have tonight. Thank you all so much for attending. I really appreciate you taking the time, and especially for those of you where maybe it's now 1 in the morning. Hope you get a good night's sleep. And if you have additional questions, you can feel free to contact me. And we'll have that in the message that we send out as well when we send out the recording too.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
evening or
everybody.
okay, wherever you are.
Good one.